of both military training. Sorry, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Sure. Okay. Okay. And I hope my screen is still visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So, given the context of a cultural situation, the experience of first getting recruited, thereafter getting trained, and then participating in military operations, and then retiral. So, the entire process sees a whole cadre of professionals going in from school. Since most of our soldiers come from 10th or 12th grade pass, so they go through an educational program. They see a rigid training structure, a regimentation, and then also an esprit de corps, which of course they bring back to their villages, to their homes, to the cities where they belong. And you can see number of social cultural movements also, like for example, the role of Havildar Anna Hazare and many others like him, who have contributed to the national development processes as well. Um, Additional to this, which is not covered usually in the study of the military aspects, is the belief in martial traditions and ethos, as well as samajik izzat, so which means basically the pride of the community. So when an individual gets recruited or commissioned in the Indian Armed Forces, there is a great sense of pride and belonging that is also brought to the family. And it also helps a number of repressed groups to come up within the system, because there is a system of meritocracy, and hard work is recognized in terms of promotions, awards, and a number of other opportunities which the military progression ensures. So given that context, there has been instances where entire villages have developed and progressed. And today, in today's context, we are also observing a number of glass ceilings that are being broken with the recruitment of women in this corps of military police. We are also observing officers, women officers, getting number of awards, as well as going on to the world's highest battlefield. I have a nice picture of that, which will follow subsequently. But what we are saying is that traditionally the military was looked as a male bastion, and today, while the world is also changing, the armed forces are keeping up with that, although slow, but they're also looking at the context in which they're situated. So having said that, the armed forces truly represent what is actually national, and the way we are recruiting our large civilian population, training them for specific objectives, and all of it leads us back to the constitutional values and the spirit of the freedom struggle that we've had, as well as what are our future aspirations. The last aspect of the cultural classification is the role of pensions. So however small a pension is, it brings a sense of dignity to our retired veterans. It enables families to make certain decisions within the household level, and that also has impact within the whole village to town sphere. So given that context, the role of armed forces is not just about fighting wars or aiding a civil society, but it is also about expansion of our civil society behavior. So having said that, our entire policy making and procurement of armed forces will also get calibrated accordingly. So to build on this narrative of how we are affecting our policy and procurement, I have just mapped out the traditional as well as modern role of the armed forces and what we are doing currently in the 21st century. So uh, given our historical context, in 1947, straight after freedom, we had our not so friendly neighbor launching an attack onto Jammu and Kashmir, and the subsequent accession to India. The Indian armed forces were rushed to JNK, and we all are very aware of the successes of both the engineering and soldierly values that were achieved in giving us security in JNK. Having said that, this was a defensive operation. At the same time, we had a police role in Hyderabad, where national integration of princely states was also carried out by the armed forces. Thereafter, there have been defensive as well as offensive roles of the Indian Army, which was a traditional sense. And why I say it's continuous is because this mandate is ongoing even till date. Our armed forces are trained, raised, and prepared for such a role. We also have had successes in 1961 with the accession of Goa. We've had a limited offense in 1965, where the first time India opened the Lahore front, we took on technically and numerically superior enemy and defeated them with World War II vintage tanks. And then in 1971, we see the restitution of rights of oppressed Bengali populations in the East Pakistan territory, and thereafter the creation of Bangladesh, which was upholding the universal human rights. It was also ensuring that the refugees who had come into India get repatriated with ease, as also overcome the military threat that was faced by the Bengali civilian population in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. We've also been involved, by we, I mean the armed forces, they were involved in border management up till 1965. The immediate learnings from the 65 war was that to have a buffer sort of armed forces, which would be the central armed police forces, and thereafter we see raising of the border security force, which was mandated to look after the border security, so that there is no elevation of the threats when we have certain border incidents. This model worked out very well for us, and we still continue to see our armed forces deployed on the LOC, the LSC, as well as certain classified disturbed areas. So that is again all within the legal provisions. Thereafter, we continue to do our aid to civil authority, even to the extent of sending relief operations and rescue operations to international states as well. Uh, a long-term developmental goal of the nation has also been, the construction of border roads, especially in the northeast, as well as in the Leh Ladakh areas. So this activity has connected villages with the national economy as well as the state economy, and this is the traditional national defense. We also have international representation, particularly when we see India's role in the 1950s in Korea, in the Indochina area, where we were involved in repatriation of POWs. We've seen a number of mountaineering expeditions where Indians have been, Indian Army officers in particular, JCOs and junior leaders in general, who have been leaders of these expeditions, where a number of foreign mountaineers and adventure activities have taken part in that, and it's brought a lot of reputation to India. Uh, so while this continues from the traditional aspects, what is important for us is how we look at our traditional challenges in terms of future wars or future threats that may emanate at any point of time. How do we arm and equip ourselves for that role? And thereafter, while we are doing all of that, and you would have seen the recent news as well of how we've acquired a number of latest machine guns, new ammunition, new weapons, new artillery guns, and so on. So this is a traditional role. Now coming on to the modern role, where we've had the latest introduction of the CDS model, where there is a effort for combined operations, jointness in command and control, and so on. And thereafter, we are now participating in a number of military diplomacy activities as well. So you can see exercise Yodh Abhyas as a particular example, where the US, which earlier used to not consider India as an equal partner in training and military, diplomacy as such, today we are a lead partner in that. We are also working with Japan, most recently concluded exercises, and so on. And similarly with many other countries. Previously, we built upon our training missions in Africa. We've had, trained the Botswanan army. We've had set up training establishments in Ethiopia and many other countries as such. So one thing that I really want to put across like this is India does not have a aspiration for creating global power in the sense of a military power, but we definitely look at having the development state. So, how do we best ensure that there is an equitable growth and a sustainable growth in the future? And that is where, while we are having number of developmental aspirations, we are also building our military strength in not a sense of having a lot of offensive capabilities, but very specifically of ensuring the defensive capabilities as well as ensuring our national sovereignty and integrity of India. So that's the objective. This whole idea is not to influence others, but to ensure that our interests are best, taken care of. So going on from that, the Indian armed forces have also taken on a counter-terrorism and anti-hijacking role. Uh, in congruence with the Indian police forces, we have also now ventured into space warfare, developing cyber capabilities. We are deeply involved in developmental activities as observed in Sadbhavna and so on, where the Indian armed forces conduct medical camps. We help the civil administration in distribution of rations, building of roads, as always, maintenance of supply chains and activities during emergencies, and so on. There has been a Hearts and Minds campaign, which we've also seen in setting up of schools, setting up of nature camps, environment awareness exercises and so on. And thereafter, we've also observed that in major cities, to continue daily activities when bridges fall or any other mishap happens, the army is usually one of the first responders that is readily available to the civil administration. Uh, Another aspect which has recently come up is the role of Bollywood movies and cultures. We are seeing a number of songs coming on YouTube. We are seeing a number of films that are military oriented. Uri, for example, was one of the movies which talks about national values within a military context, as also building in drama and entertainment. So, what it does tell us is that previously, when the armed forces were an exclusive formation, when we look at our colonial context, where there was a separation of uh, the armed forces with the civilian population. Today, there is a larger interest in terms of development of a nation. So when we look at it in that context, as I'd spoken earlier as well, was that we have a whole third aspect of our armed forces, which was the cultural aspect, which is now typically enshrined in showing these movies. A lot of your media updates today also have shown a lot of military culture, just to show how regular Indians are contributing so much more to the national development narrative. Given that context, today's international representation sees us as a major player in joint exercises. We've also assisted in the conduct of democratic elections in other states with advisory services for our civilian counterparts. We have also seen a lot of military representation in the Olympics and World Games, especially Subhadar Neeraj Chopra's achievement in the recent Olympics as well. So, having said this modern role of the armed forces, what this makes is it creates new challenges as well as new opportunities for our armed forces. While we traditionally are arming and equipping ourselves for the 21st century, we are also working on newer doctrines like theaterization, where we will look at putting our forces and jointness together to have a application of comprehensive power. Very recently, last year on 12th September, we've also announced the Samanjasya Se Shakti. So there's an old American general's saying which said that infantry wins battles and logistics wins war. So, given the current context of AI, machine learning, and so many other advances in technology, the Indian government is very interested in improving our military logistics. So, there's going to be a revolution in military logistics. We are already seeing QR coding of our ammunition, stocking of our equipment, our supplies, and so on, and making it more efficient, so that the taxpayers' money, which is going in maintaining some of our border outposts as well as our military capabilities, is best optimized and available at the time of our needs. We have also seen policy inputs towards our blue water aspirations for the Indian Ocean. What I want all the students to realize is the fact that the we have one of the largest coastlines in the world. Given that context, it expands our territorial boundaries to the maritime threats as well. And thereafter, where our navy was from a green water navy, it is now moving towards a blue water aspiration, where we will be affecting our sea lines of communications in the blue waters, which basically means that since India is energy dependent for on foreign imports, we will have to ensure that any potential threats or piracy as well will not affect our energy supplies. And therefore it becomes very important that we are not seen as an offensive force, but as a cooperative force which is working together as a joint partner, equal partner with other nation states. And we are therefore looking at collaborations and integration in a very large manner. And therefore the whole idea of creating an Amrit Kal for 2047 needs to balance our military capabilities, our military aspirations with policy objectives. So, coming to that, I just want to share a glimpse of the recent news that has been there, where we are very proud to say that in the recent past, our Minister of Home Affairs has announced that there's been complete control of security forces on terrorism in, as per a report on JNK in the print newspaper for 4th January. We've also observed 168% decline in terrorism in JNK as on 19th December. We've seen a recent launch of India's first indigenous aircraft carrier. We are seeing upgrades to our Arjun tanks. We are seeing women officers go to Siachen, and we've also seen, our representation in Olympics, and thereafter, most recently, the upgradation of our technology as well as our uniforms and our capabilities. Having said that, there's a huge opportunity for many of you students to look at the defense startup challenges. There are a number of inputs for people to look at innovations and how that can best serve our nation in terms of improving ready to eat meals. There are opportunities for heating cooling systems. There are opportunities for storage and logistics and so on. So there are a number of ways where academia, where we all are currently, can contribute to the national development perspective, as also looking at how we would like to influence a nation that looks at the comprehensive economic development, so that the existing challenges of hunger, of water, of equitable distribution of resources are well taken care of, while the potential threats of external actors is negated at the earliest with a strong military base which is efficiently deployed. So that's largely what I wanted to share with the larger group. I would like to take on questions now with all of you. uh, Dr. Devinder?
Is there any question? Any question?
Okay.
Huh? Is there any question from people who have joined online?
Dave, maybe before someone else asks a question, I would like to ask a question. First of all, thank you, Sagat, for that very, I think you've encapsulated what broadly was the mandate to look at what is the changing profile of the military itself in, recent times. And you've done that in a very concise manner within about 20-25 minutes, because we also had time constraints.
That's it.
One significant point, of course, in fact, I would make it two. One, of course, is if you could, for the benefit of the students, touch upon two specific issues that have sort of gained salience in recent times. One, of course, is the concept of defense diplomacy itself, and how we are now enmeshing it with our foreign policy establishment, especially. You
Right.
see the foreign secretary and the army chief, for example, going together to, places like Myanmar and other countries. And of course, our export profile has also enhanced significantly. The second is on the concept of civil defense. And especially, we've had the concept of territorial army, which unfortunately, although it's been there for so many years, I don't think everyone is quite that aware of it. And if you could just touch upon these two for the benefits of the students. I mean, I'm talking about civil defense and this thing, and maybe you could connect it with
Surely.
the
Surely.
territorial defense.
Right.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
Most welcome. Thank you for your question, sir. So let's start with defense diplomacy. Uh, India in the 1950s also was playing a very influential role in defense diplomacy. When we see the Indochina Prevention of Conflicts and Security, ICCS, that was established, it was actually led by India, including the medals that were issued were minted in Bangalore. So this is something where India's contribution, of course, is not highlighted in a global context, but what was particularly interesting was the role of General SPP Thorat, who got a Kirti Chakra for his activities in the Indochina repatriation of POWs. And this is something that many students should look up on Google and learn more about the role of India in the CCS. We've also seen the role of General Themaya in Korea, where we had the 60th Field Ambulance going into peacekeeping role, and it was also our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Nehru, who didn't want to send a military force, but he was willing to send a medical contingent to respond to things. And you'll be surprised to hear that it was so well appreciated that till today the government of Korea invests a lot of money in having many of these veterans to visit them every year on an annual basis during the Memorial Day. So what it says is that the immense contribution of people like General Rangarajan, who was a doctor RMO over there commanding, he got a Mahavir Chakra in those operations, and there was a Captain Banerjee who got a Veer Chakra, also retired as a general. So our defense diplomacy has been a continuous process in terms of initially being helping with repatriation of POWs, thereafter to being medical agencies. And today, we also see in the recent Nepal earthquake crisis, we sent an entire contingent of engineering response with their own equipment and their own. And we were the first country to actually send a response unit as part of our defense diplomacy. We've also seen a greater role in terms of the training establishments that India is playing, and as also within our training academies, a number of foreign cadets who graduate each year from IMA, OTA, Naval Academy, and so on. So defense diplomacy is not just about you know fighting battles or participating in peacekeeping, but we are also participating in international expeditions for sports, for adventure activities, as also training candidates for future commissions in their own respective armed forces. You would have also seen during the Republic Day where a prince from another country was given command of one of the contingents. So that's the level of diplomacy and mutual cooperation that we extend to. I think so. This is again aligned with our culture and values of considering everyone as ours, as well as considering our guests as gods. So that aligns also with our cultural values. Coming back to the civil defense, I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to the civil defense during the recent lockdown, as we observed. But in the military context, we've seen them operational in 1965 in the Rajasthan sector, where they were assisting, movement of godowns and equipment and storage at that point of time. In 1971 war as well, they had something called the ARP, which was the air raid precautions. Number of young boys also, as part of the NCC, were cycling down to homes and putting black papers and newspapers on windows so that there was complete blackout in border cities. So what I want to specifically highlight about the civil defense is that it is an entire organization which comes under the bureaucracy, and it's a state voluntary organization. So it also gives a monetary allowance of 3,500 to 4,500 per month for the participants and volunteers in that. So given that context, the civil defense is a very useful organization, and there are larger roles being envisaged for them towards the national integration objectives. So eventually we will see a whole group of people from the NCC, the Bharat Scouts and Guides movement, the NSS, and others move, or again, since this is voluntary, moving on to a civil defense role and assisting the civil administration in the discharge of their duties, as beautifully observed during the lockdown, where we had civil defense wardens. Now, coming back to the territorial army, this is again a very interesting concept. Started in 1948 as a change from the auxiliary forces of India, which was run by the British, where able-bodied civilians aged between 18 to 42 could join a territorial army and be embodied for about 2 months to 3 months, depending on the requirements of the time. Now, the territorial army has a role of assisting the armed forces in terms of freeing them up for greater responsibilities. So you'll be actually surprised that number of aspirants who usually get rejected in 6 to 8 attempts from the SSB, starting from the NDA aspiration application process to the direct entry scheme or technical entry scheme. This idea of wanting to serve India is very strong in most of them, and everybody usually applies for the territorial army. It's a very competitive exam, and regrettably, I would say that since there are very few vacancies, not many qualify for this exam as well. But since you can apply till the age of 42, many able-bodied middle-aged men also keep applying for this examination. So it does, I mean, a typical territorial army recruitment rally just shows you the entire democratic process of India, where people from all walks of life come with this idea of wanting to serve the nation. So I'm very glad that this point was also picked up. And of course, our territorial army is also performing very well in current objectives. A number of ecological battalions have been raised, and you can see in Uttarakhand, especially when the issue of Joshimat is very live today, that these ecological battalions have actually helped in afforestation activities, and ensured that landslides are prevented. It's ensured that water tables rise up in the right manner, and also assisted the civil administration during many of the disaster activities. In the wartime process, we've had some great successes in both Fazilka sector in 65 and 71. We've seen them successful in the Barmer sector in 71. Well, these territorial army battalions, which consisted of local volunteers who were embodied for a few times over, they've also greatly contributed to the national development perspective from that point of view, and also the military outcomes of the same. I hope I've answered your questions around it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that that'd be very useful for the students also.
Sagar sir, we have questions from our students. So I guess one by one I will.
Sure, please. If you can relay them to me, please.
Okay, Harsh will go first. Harsh, please introduce yourself.
So, Jain sir, my name is Sagat. I'm studying MA International Relations in CICIL first year. So, my question is one. Sir, you mentioned about counterterrorism. So, what can be the role of civil military fusion in counterterrorism operations? And second is, sir, what is the requirement right now in modern context for enhancing the relationship between army and civilians?
Firstly, Jayan, to you too. It's a very good question. Currently, we are working very closely with the civil administration for counterterrorism. You know, very recently, sorry, am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
yeah.
Okay. So very recently, the CRPF has
Sagat,
been
what you could do is maybe stop sharing the screen, then
sure.
you'll be able to view the audience also.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So very recently, the CRPF has been lauded as a backbone for the armed forces operating in JNK. So what did the CRPF do? It enabled the army to come in for a very specific operation, while ensuring that the cordons and search activities were looked after by the CRPF itself. So when you follow General Atta Hasnain's posts also, you'll see how he talks about very frequently about the important role that CRPF is playing in this context. Thereafter, we are also seeing an evolution in terms of when we have disaster strikes, both the NDRF, which has volunteers from all our central armed police forces, as well as few from the army, they combine their resources together to respond to the scenario. So, given that context, I mean, let's put it very clearly upfront. Our Indian armed forces are subservient to the civil administration. So, in that context, we are an army that responds and reacts as per the constitution. So, whatever objectives, whatever activities are given, it follows a legal process, and that is given to us by the civil mandate. So, having said that, all the counterterrorism operations at at the beginning and at the end, the civil representative from the civil administration has to be present, as well as the Gaon Sarpanch and the Panchayat Raj institutions. Also, some members have to be present to sign off on go ahead of commands as well as the closure commands. So, this process has a complete SOP in place, and nothing happens without having the signatures in place and so on. So, there is a greater coordination, and a lot of it is now templatized. So, the legal process, the standard operating procedures, and so on. So this actually greatly helps everyone to follow the rule of the law, as well as to follow a process. It's not that you would do whatever you feel like, but you would follow what you're trained to do. So this actually makes us more efficient as well as compliant. I hope I've answered that question.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. We have two more questions, I guess. Vibha, please go.
Good morning, sir. I'm Vibha. I'm pursuing Masters in International Relations. Could you please elaborate more on the role of Indian military in election security and advisory in other countries? We have been taught about their role in India during the election, but could you elaborate more as to what is their mandate in other countries?
Okay, so the mandate usually comes from a request. This request is relayed from government to government, and then, so today the Indian Armed Forces have largely freed themselves of such roles, and you will see BSF contingents. And this time, this is the first time, in fact, this is a very good question. An 30 women contingent has been sent for such a role to, support the election processes, one of the member states in Africa. So what is happening is that a request comes in that India is one of the largest and active democracy in the world. You have experience in organizing elections, so can you help us in setting up guidelines, setting up polling booths, as also ensuring the security around the same. So when an Indian contingent goes there, we have a number of representatives from IS. In fact, even in after 1971 war, while the Indian army withdrew within 3 months, our bureaucrats were sitting there for more than 6 to 8 months, helping them establish their own governments, how to establish their democracy, and so on. So as also our own committees have gone to help Singapore establish their constitution. So countries have actually looked at India as very exemplary. How to, we were one of the first countries to give universal rights and as also voting rights to women, as also some representation for the minority communities, and so on. So these are some of the aspirations that all the states have asked the armed forces. So basically the armed forces is looked up to for their discipline, for their procedures, for their methods, and that is something that everyone would like to copy and replicate in their own systems. No doubt that they will not act alone. There will always be a civilian administrator and others who come for advisory roles. So we work as a team, and that really truly represents India. So that's how it works.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any other question?
Sir, there is a question in chat box.
Yes, there are two questions in the chat box. I'll first answer the language requirements. So, to put it in perspective, usually in India, most of our citizens speak 2 to 3 languages. So, English, Hindi, and of course, your mother tongue. Now, foreign languages is taught in our training establishments as well. And, a lot of our troops come from different locations. So, Gurkhali, for example, is another one where, our officers invest in their learning outcomes. And then, foreign language ability is also seen as your own perspective of self-development. So a lot of officers are encouraged, and also even soldiers are encouraged to learn a new language. And it is all about being able to talk to your counterparts. And a basic language courses 3 months period, 6 months period, and also depending on your future tenures as well. So those opportunities are available. The army has a very robust self-education policy and program in place, so that enables you to choose the language of your choice. And the whole idea is to be able to talk to your counterparts. So I hope I've answered that question. And this has been ongoing even before British era. And this has been actually, it goes well in our culture. We're a multilinguistic culture. So this is nothing new for us. Coming to the question of Agnipath Yojana, see, right now it's in a trial phase. So this requirement has not sprung up out of the blue. It's been on for the last 20 years. If you see the policy papers from the IDSA, Manohar Parrikal Institute of Defense and Strategic Analysis, if you look at a number of other policy papers and so on, so there has always been a requirement of revamping our recruitment patterns, giving an early exit opportunity with a golden handshake, so that youth may look at other opportunities in life. And if you really look at it, it gives you the youngest profile for your recruitment, and then an option to have an early exit or continue. So again, it becomes a meritocracy where the top performing candidates are retained in service. So that being said, it's too early to comment more about the successes, efficiencies, and others that may be achieved. But definitely, it's something that has grown over a period of time. So I think it's only best if we look at how this system works out, and eventually what will be the outcomes. There will never be a compromise on our national security objectives or our training objectives or any of the standards that the armed forces espouse. So yes, highlight. Right, staff officers. Okay, so staff officers, of course, are doing staff work. In that sense, they assist the diplomatic mission in achieving their outcomes. So, how much would one person affect that? I'm not there to say, but definitely they give value advice on what are our capabilities, what are our aspirations, what are our strengths and weaknesses, and that enables the diplomatic mission with directives from the ministry and many other chain of command to make a valid decision. So a staff officer who's selected as a defense attaché would be of very high caliber, would be top of line in his own cadre, and therefore he is able to adapt to the requirements of the mission, and therefore he acts in accordance with what the expectations from the chain of command are. So definitely, many of them at the personal level have influenced improved relations and cooperation, and there's a long way where many more inputs come. So this is somewhere where we have an opportunity for your institution as well, where the effect of think tanks and public policy and policy writing, drafting, and studies of international relations, studies of diplomacy. When you make policy papers and thought papers or white papers from your prestigious university, many staff officers and defense officers from the staff would be reading the same, and that would actually help them to make more valid decisions, better policy outcomes. And this is a great opportunity which even the armed forces are looking for. So it's a very valid question, Yash. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Any other question?
Sir, I have a question.
Sagat sir, there's one more question from our student. Anuj, yes.
Sir, recently China has announced that it is going to focus more on technological aspect other than human resource. So, in that response, what Indian military is doing?
Okay, that's a good question. We are not responding to China, number one. We are developing our own capabilities. I had also shown you how the IDEX is an opportunity for you young students as well to, look at AI, ML, and, many other innovations in place. India's context is very different. So we are looking at, looking at our borders, looking at our internal security situation, looking at, but more important, we are also looking at the developmental aspects of technology. So how best can we have an improved food distribution program? How best can we have an improved, so if you see the Gati Shakti program, how best can we use AI ML to reduce traffic congestion so that supplies reach our civilian population on time, and there's a reduction in wastage of food as well. So not just in the military context, we have a dual application. So if you can improve your supply chain in the civilian aspects which affect our day-to-day life, definitely in the military time period, some of your logistics can be prioritized and lifted and moved to a new location where it's most required. So in that context, we are not looking at a military only kind of application, but more specifically at our civilian population and expanding our values of democracy and giving equitable access to services. So that's where our national objectives are. And of course, the defense comes in ensuring that these national objectives are met and there is no external threat to the same, external or internal threat to the same. I hope that answers.
Thank you, sir.
Like I said, there is one more question. Anushka, please.
So you mentioned the military's role in the changing role of military in policy making. So how relevant would you say is the military's role in policy making in a democracy like ours?
Right, right. So we are very relevant in the context that today a number of retired officers are now joining think tanks, as a way of giving back to society. A number of them have become governors. Many of them have become administrators, and so on. And some of them have also contested elections and won. So it's being a live democracy. We have many opportunities to serve society. So they have become influential in terms of how various policies would have been created and so on. Even a CDS appointment, of course, is retired officer coming in as an advisor. So in that context, there is a greater scope for policy work to happen. You will see institutions like the United Service Institution of India. You will see MP, IDSA, CLAWS, SENJAOs, and so many others who are hiring number of research assistants, research officers as well, to work closely with military personnel, both serving and retired, to create these policies. So the Navy has an entire policy division where they're looking at future scopes, as also looking at how national economy can be developed. So the whole idea is not just looking at a narrow perspective of defense alone, but also of human development. So policy, if you see General DS Huda's draft policy on national security strategy, it's available online. So he's also taken principal responsibility for any of the suggestions and recommendations and shortfalls, if any, in that report. So policy space is also seeing a number of participation, a lot of participation from a number of our veterans.
Sir, there is one more question. Kritika, please.
Sir, can you highlight the interoperability of various forces involved in border security, like ITBP, BSF, with Army?
Right, right. So usually that's again situation specific. At the end of the day, we are all Indians. So what is the mission? What are the objectives? And what are the outcomes expected? That the force commander on ground will decide, and who gets deployed where, and that's subjective again to this thing. Now, nowhere has there been ever a problem in terms of getting the outcomes delivered on time. We are also very good in sharing credit for achieving outcomes, and many times we have shared intelligence, shared inputs, helped each other in evacuating casualties and so on. So at the end of the day, it's always about Har Kaam Desh Ke Naam, as I had started my presentation with. So interoperability, of course, there are turf issues also in between, which happens even between your department and the other one. So that's very normal, and that's human behavior as well. But definitely, at the end of the day, the responsibility is of the force commander on ground, and it's his or her able leadership that ensures the most efficient interoperability happens on ground.
Okay, is there any other question from here? Is there any question from the people who have joined online?
I think Dave, I think I can see General Mistry who joined us. I don't know whether he can hear us, but if he can, it'll be wonderful to have his views also.
Yes, sir.
I don't know whether General Mistry is still there, but I did. Yeah, I can see you, sir. Good
Yeah,
morning.
I've been listening quietly. Only thing is, I could not join at the beginning, so I did miss out a major part of Sagat's presentation. So, and in between, also a lot of people came, for discussion, etc. So, missed out. But I think a very nice presentation by Sagat.
Thank you, sir.
I have a personal equation with Sagat. His brother is a dear friend of mine, Gautam, and besides, his presentation now, I can tell you he's a very, very conscientious citizen. I don't know, Sagat, if you remember, sometime back, 4 5 years back, you had contacted me about some traffic nuisance near Shankar Vihar.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I still remember that.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so conscientious. But a
Thank
wonderful
you.
presentation. And
Thank you, sir.
on
So,
this last question about border management, let me elaborate. See, BSF is responsible for borders on the western side as well as the Indo-Bangladesh border. Now, both these borders are fairly stable. When you talk of western side, it is what is referred to as the IB sector. And similarly, Indo-Bangladesh border, except for some little, misunderstandings here and there, the borders are largely stable, and therefore there is not too much of issue. It is primarily responsibility of BSF. It's only the defense, if it comes about in case of hostilities, well, the army will have a role to play. But as against that, the ITBP is deployed along the Indo-Tibetan border, what we like to call as Indo-Tibetan border, and what the Chinese, of course, do not appreciate. In fact, they question this whole term called ITBP. They say, why do you call it Indo-Tibetan Border Police Force? No, they say it is Indo-China border, whatever it is. But that is where we still have a disputed border. That is where the line of actual control lies. And there, the Indian Army and the ITBP have to work in very close coordination and cooperation. And as Sagat said, that there are some issues always when different agencies are there. But largely, these are issues of personality, sometimes of turf. But more or less, it is a well-established relationship. There is a very good professional relationship between both the forces, and there are no issues of coordination. Thank you.
Is there any other questions from the people who have joined online? Like anything? No? Any questions from here in the audience? I guess, sir, there is no question now. So I would request our director, sir, I guess, to deliver vote of thanks to the Sagat for agreeing to speak to us at this short notice, I guess.
Dave, thank you very much for surprising me. I didn't know I had to deliver the vote of thanks, but it's obviously it's a personally I thought this was and I second what General Mistry said. I listened to the entire talk, so I had the benefit of listening in with a few distractions that General Mistry understands the position occupies. But overall, I thought it was extremely, and I mentioned this, very concise, very. I think sometimes we have to reiterate the basic. Often, today we live in a world of information overload. So sometimes things tend to get more complicated, and we miss out on some of the basic, the foundational sort of, aspects of the doctrine. So I thought the manner in which you were able to put this and connect it to the students, because a lot of these talks are organized for the benefit of our students. And ultimately, they are the next generation subject matter experts, and interacting with experts like you, General Mistry, hopefully will inspire them to greater heights. So first and foremost, we'd really like to thank you for taking time out on behalf of the university, the school, and spending time and educating our students, educating us. Of course, I really want to thank my colleague, very soon to be Dr. Devendra Kumar, for organizing this. And, we hope to look forward to having such, talks in the future. This is the beginning of a more long-term association, Shaugat, with our school as well as with all the other schools here. The idea of having these talks is to try and encourage this, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, whatever you want to call it, engagements. And hopefully this would have generated a few thoughts in the minds of all the audience. Once again, I take this opportunity to thank you, to thank Dev, to thank General Mistry and his colleagues who've joined us. I saw Colonel Rahul Jain was there briefly. I can see some of the others who've joined from the other schools also, as well as a lot of my colleagues who are here, as well as a number of our students who come from broadly the international relations background. But we also have, a number of in-service personnel who are studying here. In that sense, we are not a typical university. So thank you once again, everyone, and we look forward to meeting all of you very soon in one of these other occasions. And Shaugat, please continue to stay in touch with us and associate with us in the school. Thank you and have a great day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Zain.
Thank you. Jai Hind.
Yes.